trying to think.
Gotta get her going here. Come on. All right. Passage for the day. Here we go. "22, I think I went to, huh? Yep. Proverbs 19:20 to 22. Give you a minute to find that. Proverbs 19:20 to 22. It's okay. Thank you, dear. I'm asking you. You can't answer a question with another question.
Well, I think Proverbs is after Psalms.
Yeah.
David, and then Solomon was coming after David. So
Okay. Well, that's real logical,
I,
Dan. That's real logical.
But
Yeah.
it's not true, huh?
First one is Proverbs, the Proverbs of Solomon.
Uh-huh.
Most likely he wrote most of
Yeah. You will see a number of names of the author. It'll say the sayings of so-and-so, or the sayings of this, the sayings of that. We think that Solomon used other names sometimes in his writing. We're not sure. We don't know that he put the book together the way we have it today. Most likely, it was put together after his death sometime, either during the first years of his son, Rehoboam, or sometime maybe during the Babylonian captivity, or right afterward. But by the time you get to the Second Temple period, about 400, the book of Proverbs is pretty much in the construction organization that we have it today. And that's what they found when they translated into Greek in Alexandria around 250 BC. So, yeah, Solomon, but like I say, you'll see other names and you wonder, well, who are these guys? Well, we think it's Solomon using other names. It could be other people too, for that matter, but for the most part, it's a lot of Solomon's wisdom. Okay, so 19:20 to 22. Listen to counsel and accept discipline, that you may be wise the rest of your days. So, counsel. When Solomon talks about counsel and wisdom, it's always spiritual counsel and spiritual wisdom, and it's always based upon the Word of God. That is, it's always based upon the scriptures that were there at the time. It's always based upon relationship with God. And the only way, unless you're a high priest who goes into the Holy of Holies and once in a while, the only way you can have a real relationship with God is through His Word. So when you see those words, wisdom, counsel, always think of the Bible, basically, the Word of God. Okay, and that you will be wise the rest of your days. And again, the wise here, wise to salvation, wise in the ways of the soul, wise in an eternal sense. All right, that's always what's going on. Same with the word discipline. So we're talking spiritual discipline here, which that gets into physical discipline. It gets into, putting your lusts down and seeking God above all things and that kind of thing. So always think of that when you hear these words. Verse 21, many plans are in a man's heart, but the counsel of the Lord will stand. So we have a lot of thoughts, and we make a lot of plans. And of course, we're familiar with the concept James talks about, and James says, don't say, tomorrow I'm going to do this, the next day I'm going to do that. Always say, if God wills, I will do this or that, or go here and there, and so on and so forth. And we may not always say it, but I think, I would hope that we as believers will at least think it. We may not say, hey, I'm going to go, got a business trip to Phoenix, so-and-so, I'm going to do that, put it on your calendar. That's not a sin, because we understand, we kind of have this ongoing understanding that, of course, God could bring the world to an end. That would put an end to our plans, wouldn't it? Or other things can happen that God may decide that we can't do those things, or we won't be able to accomplish those things. So planning is fine, and planning is good, and there's nothing wrong with it necessarily, but it's just that we keep in mind that this is always relative. It's relative to God's will. God may decide to do something different, and we should be ready to move accordingly. Okay, so that's what he means by this. We have a lot of plans, but the will of God, the counsel of God, the final goals of God will stand. And then verse 22, what is desirable in a man is kindness, and it is better to be poor man than a liar. You would think, one of the problems with Proverbs is that we're used to Hebrew parallelism. That is, the first strophe or the first line of a poem in Hebrew in the Psalms, we see this all the time, is then repeated but with different words. The same thought, okay, is repeated with different words. In Proverbs, you don't have that quite so much. As a matter of fact, in Proverbs, sometimes you have a strophe put together with two lines that are total different subjects. And so we have the first line of this strophe, of this poetical section, that is about kindness, and the second one that's about being a liar. And at first glance, it's kind of tough for us to put together why Solomon would do that and put those things together like that. Can anyone think of a connection between kindness and lying? Yeah, it does seem that way, doesn't it? Yeah. Yeah, and then being lying is kind of the opposite. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, but that's very unusual for Hebrew poetry. It's almost unheard of for Hebrew poetry, as a matter of fact, to have a first line something and the second line totally opposite. So is there, can you see a connection? I mean, it's tough, I agree, I grant you, but maybe there is one that we're just not seeing right now. Yes, ma'am, go.
Could it be that maybe you're lying because it's going to hurt somebody?
Ah, you're very close. You're very close. You kind of have to know a little bit about Israel at the time. And this is getting towards, as Solomon got older, Israel was getting more corrupt. So that by the time he died and his son took over, they were ready, the northern 10 tribes were ready to split from Jerusalem and Judea over the corruption. And Rehoboam, his son, was extremely corrupt. He was a pleaser. He did things just to be popular. This was not Solomon's way of doing things at all. And so one of the problems in that society, and some of the prophets talk about this, the lying that's going on is lying about kindness. In other words, a lot of people were saying, oh, we take care of the poor. We're very charitable. We're very kind. We just give like crazy. You know, we're just so charitable with our money. And the fact is, they were lying. You know, Jesus talks about this. The Pharisees and others at his time, they very often, instead of taking care of their parents, which could cost money. Depends on what the situation is, but it could. And so the Pharisees, instead of taking care of their parents, paying money for their medical care or their housing or food or whatever, they would take a section of their income, and especially their income from spices. And they made a lot of money. Jewish rich people, and the Pharisees were well off, so were the Sadducees. They both made a lot of money in the spice trade. That was kind of like the oil dealers of the day, right? And so they would take a group of spices, or they would take the money from that, and they would declare it a contribution to the temple. The word was korban. They would declare it a korban. They would say, they would go to the temple and they'd say, we're going to go $1,000 worth of spices, or $1,000 of our profit from our spice trade to the temple. Aren't we wonderful? Yeah, that's our korban. That's our gift. That's our korban. And then somebody would say, hey, we saw your dad out the other day with a thing of pencils and a cup, you know. And they said, hey, well, you know, too bad. We decided to give that money to the temple. Because boy, we really think highly of the temple, big time, you know, or the synagogue in the Pharisees' case, and just didn't have any left over for mom and dad. And Jesus talks about that very thing, and he says, He says, woe to you Pharisees who declare a korban to the temple and let your mom and dad starve. Okay, woe to you. Okay, so you're not really being very kind if you're lying about your charitable gifts. And so that's one connection that's certainly possible here. Okay, I can't say that that's the only connection or that's the absolute connection, but that is a connection. All right, I got a kick out of it this morning. One of the laws that recently was passed and signed in California, and Governor Newsom, after he won his recall thing, he went crazy and just started signing laws like crazy. One of them I think was really interesting. One of them said that in California now, insurance companies have to allow children to put their parents on their health insurance. Yes.
The other way around.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And recently it's been the other way around. You keep your children on your health insurance till 25. It's still 25, isn't it, Tony? 26, okay. So keep your children on your own health insurance till 26. Well, now in California, it's the other way around. Now, if you're doing pretty well and you've got real good health insurance, from your company or whatever, and your folks are kind of, can't get a good Medicare supplement or whatever, then you can put them on your plan. And that's now the governor's told the insurance companies, you have to allow that. And I think that's kind of interesting. That's kind of a throwback to the way it was. If you read the Old Testament and you read the laws in Leviticus, there's a real big emphasis put on taking care of your parents in their old age. And it was really stressed by the laws, by Moses' law, by God in Moses' law. But it was always something that the Jews in particular in the Old Testament and in the New Testament time really had a hard time with. They just didn't want to do it. And they didn't. And a lot of the people who were beggars, a lot of the people who were hanging around on the street begging, were widows. Certainly widows were a big problem, and orphans, but also parents who had been thrown out of their homes because they couldn't afford them anymore. They couldn't pay off their leases or rentals or whatever, or they could stay in their homes, but they had no way of getting food, and so they would go out and beg so they could have food. It was a huge problem in Israel, huge. And Jesus and Paul and others, other Christian writers outside the New Testament really come down hard on the New Testament Jews for this ignoring the needs of the parents. It was a real problem. Yes, sir.
Yeah, do they have the dependency? The parent is
I don't think so. I don't think so. California does a lot of things, and there's no means testing, at all in a lot of the things that they do. You don't have to prove nothing. It's like you can get free this and that, Medi-Cal they call it. You can get Medi-Cal, and you don't have to do any kind of income testing or even resident or citizenship testing this is why they're they spend billions and billions and billions of dollars taking care of people, and that's just why so many immigrants, even though the fence there is pretty good shape, it's better than it is in Texas, but they'd rather go. A lot of these people would rather go to California because they're accepted just like that, and you get all kinds of freebies without any means testing at all.
a lot of states are paying for a child dependency and
Yeah.
giving $500 per child
Yeah.
or something like this.
Yeah, yeah.
I wonder if that falls in line with. the
It could be.
too.
It could be. Yeah. I don't know all the specific details of it, but there was a lot of comment on it in the newspaper this morning, in the San Diego paper, and most everybody thought this was a great deal. This was a good deal. And so I expect probably some other states will probably follow along. It will eventually become something pretty normal. Yeah.
There must be a lot of hush on it because I haven't heard a thing.
You haven't heard a thing?
How did you find it, hear about
It was just signed Friday. It was just signed Friday, so it probably hasn't made the rounds. Yeah, hot off the press. Yeah, it was just he signed a whole bunch all week long, and that was just one of them. There were many others, a lot of others ones, you know, and some of them quite bizarre.
They thought they were in debt before, but they'll see more.
Well, actually, they're not. You know, actually, California has a huge surplus because their taxes are so high, and so they have a big surplus, and they got all this government money, and so they kept it all, and they're doling it out, here and there, so they're in good shape. Anyway, so that's one connection that could be. You know, it's better to be telling the truth than a lie, and it's also better to be kind. And if you're going to be kind, if you're going to say you're kind, then don't lie about it. You know, don't make it. Don't blame God. You know, some people kind of, well, I'm sorry, I can't take care of this problem or that problem. I gave too much money to church. That's not a good excuse, really. Yeah.
Well, when I was a kid, it was pretty common for the old grandma to live. Oh, sure,
Yes, my great-grandmother.
New one, or do it?
It's a new one. My great-grandmother lived in the big house on the ranch, and when she passed away, when she passed away, all the young people were gathered together. We all went up to the room where Grandma was, and everybody got to see her off. That was a memorable day. I don't remember if I sent this or not.
Nobody's.
Okay. All right, so we'll get back to the Reformation history, finish that up hopefully next week or so, and get on with other things. So the 95 Theses are done and finished. They're out and about. They're making the rounds. And so the upshot, what happens because of that? Well, look at paragraph 18. Leo X made a second attempt to salvage his relationship with the Elector of Saxony. Remember, the Elector of Saxony is Frederick the Wise, and he is an elector, and the Pope and the Holy Roman Emperor, the two of them, are fighting over his attention. Okay. Again, it's important to remember the political situation at the time. All right? There is no Germany. There is no nation of Germany. What we see today as Germany was made up of a patchwork quilt of duchies and dukedoms and earldoms and this and that, and it was connected to Italy. Okay, organically, as an organization. It was connected to Italy, and I think Sardinia, and a few other small spots, and it was called the Holy Roman Empire. Spain was a part of the Holy Roman Empire, as was France, but they were like independent members. In other words, they weren't part of the organization. All right, they were part of it like a treaty or allies, but not organically. They had been at one time, but now they were a little bit more independent. Okay, so this Holy Roman Empire, the emperor is not hereditary. In other words, his son does not automatically become the next emperor when he dies, and so on and so forth. He is elected. Okay, so in the Holy Roman Empire, and various of these duchies and earldoms down into Italy and whatever all have certain number of votes. They have a certain number of electors, just like we have electors in our electoral college, okay, when we elect president. Well, they had somewhat the similar situation. And these guys were connected to geographical territories. And the other princes and dukes in that area would get together and they would nominate and they would elect one guy, and that's the guy that then would go to the meeting to elect the emperor. Kind of democratic in a way, kind of a representative democracy, you might say. Okay. Now the common folks had no say in this. The shopkeepers, the peasants, the serfs, they had no say in this. The knights, even many times, and such, they had no say in this. You had to be a lord of some kind. You had to be a lord of the manor somehow in order to be part of these groups that elected the guy that would then elect the emperor. But still, it was some kind of representation, you know. Anyway, so the two big powers at that time were Spain and France. They wanted a certain guy on the throne, Holy Roman Emperor. Germany, the German guys, okay, they were kind of a majority of the electors. They wanted a certain guy. And the Pope and his electors, they wanted a certain guy. So there were these parties, you would call them, kind of like Democrats, Republicans, you know, Labor, Socialist, whatever. You had these different parties with different desires and wants and wanted things done a certain way. And they're angling to get their guy elected, all right? The two biggest are the German princes and the Pope and his people. Okay, so those are the two that are fighting each other most of the time. And they're trying to ally with France or Spain, or they're trying to ally with the German princes and all this kind of stuff. Okay, so you have to understand the politics, otherwise the Reformation makes no sense to you. You can't figure out why Luther survives. You can't figure out why Luther isn't executed by now. Well, he's not executed because of the politics that are going on. And the politics are a direct result, going all the way back 700 years to Charlemagne and his children. So when God sets out to do something, a lot of times, because he's dealing with us yokel humans, it takes 5 or 6 or 7 or 800 years for him to pull it off. Because it does. It just sometimes takes a long time to work things out. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I was wondering, what exactly is a lord? How do you get the title, and what is your position?
Oh, you guys. In general, okay, the people we look on. Let's take England for an example. England was not a part of the Holy Roman Empire. It was separate, like England and France. It was even more independent. But we're most familiar with Parliament and the House of Lords and the House of Commons than we are probably with anything else. And so I'll use that as an example. Okay. So it's 1066. Well, maybe I should go back further. Let me go back further. It's 400. It's 440, 420, 425. Let's say 425. 425 years after Christ. The Romans have all kinds of garrisons all over the British Isles, okay? Rome starts to feel the pinch of people pressing on it, the Huns and the Vandals and all those kind of people, all Goths and so on and so forth. And so they bring home their armies. So Rome abandons, and the same thing happened in Germany and France and Spain and everywhere else too. The armies were coming home for the most part, right? Well, that leaves a vacuum, doesn't it? And so the local people, of course, they kind of have to now take care of themselves. They have to fight their own battles, so to speak, and everything else. And also, since there's a big vacuum there, people who want a different area to farm, let's say, for example, will want to move in there. So in this particular case, the people that live in Denmark, and I don't have a world map, so you're just going to have to think about this. You know how Denmark kind of sticks up north of Germany, okay? Well, a bunch of people are living there. They're called Jutes, J-U-T-E-S, Jutes. and below them are Angles, Angles, Angles. And then below them are the Saxons, okay, from Saxony, all right? Well, they're all seafaring people, okay? They make their living, they feed off the ocean and stuff, and they're seafarers, just like the Vikings way up north in Norway. Well, the Vikings start coming down into Scotland and northern England, and the Jutes and the Angles and the Saxons start coming from Denmark and Netherlands area into southern England to fill this void, this vacuum, all right? Basically what happened, and make a long story short, is if you were a Briton, okay, who had done really well with your crops and whatever, and were able to help out other people, you kind of got a group around you, all right? So you could then be kind of like a lord, so to speak. People, you would loan people money, or you would loan people land because maybe their crops failed and yours didn't. All right, and so little by little you would gain power. Well, the same would happen with these Norsemen, and the Irish too were coming from Ireland, and other groups, people from Brittany in northern France, and so on and so on, Bordeaux, all of them coming in to fill the vacuum that was left by the Romans. And depending on their success with arms, you know, if they had good soldiers with them, and depending on their success then when they started farming the land, they too then would become more powerful. They would become more influential. All right, so fast forward, we've got all these guys now, these little guys who've got these little plots, maybe the size of a small village or maybe a little bit bigger. Maybe they have a little bit of a castle, whatever, probably not much of one in those days. And then 1066 comes along, and William the Bastard, that's what he was called, William the Bastard, because his father, he was illegitimate, okay? But he had a claim through his father to the throne of England. And so William got tired of being called the Bastard, and got tired of living in northern France, and he saw that the fields over in England were a little better. The weather wasn't any better, but at least the fields were a little bit better. And so he said, well, I'll go over there. And Alfred, the guy who was on the throne at the time, was a relation to him through various people in the past, okay? So anyway, the Normans go over there, they win a battle, Battle of Hastings, was just it was easy, it was touch and go. You didn't know who was going to win, according to the chroniclers, until poor old Alfred got an arrow in his eye. Okay, and that was the end of that. Okay, well anyway, so the Normans take over. Well, what do the Normans do? The Anglo-Saxons already have their little dukedoms and lorddoms and all this kind of stuff. But the Normans come in and they take over. And many cases they take over these manors, okay? And the first thing they did is build castles. And some of the oldest castles in England were Norman castles. And Norman castles all built the same way. They were built like the Tower of London. Tower of London was built by William the Conqueror, okay? And if you go to London and see the Tower of London, you are looking at, down to the what's called the Keep, which is the circular tower in the middle. Okay, that was actually, foundations were laid not too long after the Battle of Hastings. So that building goes back to 1067, I guess, maybe 68, somewhere around in there. So I mean, it's almost 1,000 years old. But anyway, William, in order to keep control of the country, had his lieutenants, you would say, go out, and he granted them areas of property, and he told the Anglos, hey, this is what happens when you lose. Okay? And if I want that hill with the nice fields around it, I'm going to take it. And you go take one away from somebody else. I don't care. But this one is mine. And that's what he did. Okay? The same thing played out all over Europe. You could start off as a poor guy. okay? Let's say you and 10 other families move into a valley in Schleswig-Holstein, okay? You move into a valley there, 10 families, and your crops do better than the other 9 crops, the other 9 guys. And maybe that goes on for 2 or 3 years. And so old Hans next door, he comes to you and he says, my crops have been lousy the last few years. I don't have any money to go buy seed. Will you give me some money, or will you sell me or give me some seed, and I'll owe you a piece of my crop? And you're a nice guy, Franz, And so Franz says to Hans, yeah, here you go. Here, I'll give you a bag of seed. Now you give me back 10% of your crop when you get it. Well, Hans is not a good farmer. And so Hans gets about half the crop that Franz got. But he still has to give him 10%. So that keeps him poor, right? And this happens over and over and over and over again until pretty soon, Franz is a pretty rich guy. He's got all kinds of income coming in, right? And so he can hire himself some bodyguards because people don't like him now. And he can improve his house, and he can maybe put a wall around his house, and he can maybe build a tower, and he can maybe put a moat around his house and a drawbridge and all that kind of stuff. And so then he, of course, he's paying money to the guy who maybe brought some folks home from the Crusades and is paying them because he's well off for whatever reason. And so that's he's the head, and so you're paying him off. And so he makes you, he says, well, I grant you a title. I grant you a title. You're now the Earl of Schleswig-Holstein, or you're the Earl of Holstein, or you're the Earl of whatever, or you're the Duke of whatever, or what, whatever. Okay. And this is how it happened. This is how it happened after the fall of the Roman Empire. It took a long time. It took centuries for this to happen. But again, it was just because a guy was a better farmer than the other guy. Okay? And then also you have to consider also because God blessed this field and not that field. Or God blessed this guy with a lot of good given sows, right? He had a lot of little piglets, and this guy's sow over here only had 2 little piglets. And so who's better off, right? So this goes on and on, generation after generation, until finally you get to a point, you get to the, let's say, 1500s, like Luther, okay, 1500s, and now you've got these earls and dukes who the families have been earls and dukes for, by that time now, 200 or 300 years. And people only live in 50 years, give or take. And so that's 6, 8 generations, right? So you're used to it, and everybody else is used to it. And nobody remembers how it got started. But that's how it got started. The people in the House of Lords are lords because their great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather came over on a boat with William the Conqueror. Okay? Or because they did great heroics, okay? Wellington, the Duke of Wellington, okay? The Duke of Wellington was just a common guy, just a regular common guy. But as a lieutenant, as a shave-tail lieutenant, and then as a captain and as a colonel in the wars in India, he showed himself to be very brilliant strategist and extremely brave, okay? In other words, a guy would lead a bayonet charge full of empty muskets, kind of thing, right? I mean, people did stuff like that. And so the king, because, hey, you saved my bacon, right? You saved my empire, okay? I hereby call you now Duke Wellington. You're now a duke, and I've got some property over here, and I'll split off a piece of it, and it has a nice little castle on it, a nice little manor, and I give it to you, okay? Same thing happened with Churchill. Okay? Churchill's great-grandfather was just a common everyday yokel like you and me. But he was extremely brave, and he was extremely smart. He was a good fighter. He was a great strategist. He was a great leader of men. And the king rewarded him. And the House of Churchill then became a very substantial house. You see, in America, we do the exact same thing. Okay? The different is, it's not done by the king, it's done by y'all. Okay? So, here's Zuckerberg, who's just a regular yokel, who's doesn't start out, he starts out on, nothing, right? And he comes up with this idea called Facebook, and he figures, hey, maybe I can make a little money off of this. And it takes off like gangbusters, boom, okay? And we, all of us who have accounts on Facebook, and all of us who click on the ads, and all of us who buy stuff from those ads and everything else, we make him a bazillionaire. Okay? He's not made that by the president or Congress. He's made that by us. But it's the same system. He's smarter than somebody else. Steve Jobs, okay? Wozniak, Bill Gates, they all started out in garages. They all started out in basements. They all started out as common, everyday people, just like you and me. But they had an idea, So in the European system, it's property, what you do with your property, okay, that matters, and how brave you are on the battlefield, that matters. Okay? People have problems with the royals. Okay? I don't like the royals. And I'm born with a silver spoon in their mouth. Well, let me ask you a question. Most of you are retired now, but when you were working, why did you go to work? I mean, you probably enjoyed the work. I grant you that. But aside from that, why did? Okay.
You wanted to get ahead.
Why else? Can anybody here say that they wanted their children to have as good or better life than them? Anybody disagree with that? No. Okay. When William the Conqueror went across the channel, okay, remember he was called William the Bastard, that was his official name, right? He thought to himself, and he had children by that time, he had a bunch of them. He thought to himself, now, wouldn't it be nice if my son, for example, his son's name was Stephen, wouldn't it be nice if my son, Stephen, would not be called Stephen the Bastard? Wouldn't it be good? Wouldn't it be nice? And wouldn't it be nice if he didn't owe a ton of income to the King of France? That kind of sucks him dry, just like it sucks me dry, all right? I hate paying that tab every year. I just hate it. I wonder if there's some place I can go in this world where I can get rid of that dumb name, William the Bastard, and be more independent, be more free, and therefore give my children and my children's children an opportunity not to have to pay the stupid King of France. Gee, this king over here, he died, and I'm related to him. And like my cousin Alfred, okay? And Alfred's grabbed the throne. Well, you know what? I'm as good as Alfred. And so I think I'll just go over there and take it from him. Because, hey, just because his mother was actually married to my father instead of being a mistress, that's not a good enough reason for him to have the throne. I'm just as good as he is. Okay? Besides, I want something better for my kids. And so, folks, the ancestors of Queen Elizabeth, the ancestors of Prince Harry, the ancestors of Henry VIII, the ancestors of anybody you want to name, that's all they wanted. And they were brave enough, and they were courageous enough, and they were tough enough, and mean enough, and honorary enough, and clever enough, and smart enough to pull it off. Just like Zuckerberg and Gates and Wozniak and Jobs and everything else. So don't hate the royals. It's so foolish and silly to hate the royals. They're only doing what you, and the fact that you didn't get the silver spoon, they did, is just a fact of biology and also a fact of God. Yeah. And I always tell people, I said, okay, you were born at Buckingham Palace, but you also weren't born in the Black Hole of Calcutta. Yeah. Consider your blessings. don't gripe about not being born in the Balmoral Palace because you could very well easily have been born as an unmentionable, untouchable in India. Yeah. So folks, it all comes out in the wash. That's why I say. I know a lot of people who boo every time the Queen comes out, and she didn't earn that. No, she didn't, but her grandfather did. I mean, really, her great grandfather was the last English king, great many times, the last king to lead troops in battle. He actually got on a big white horse and was in front, and he survived. I mean, and we also do the same thing. We give somebody a Congressional Medal of Honor, right? What do we give them also? What do they get also? Do you know? Do you remember?
Respect.
No, they get something very tangible, very tangible. They don't get a monetary prize, no. They get something really tangible besides the little medal around their neck. That little blue ribbon that everybody goes, hey, with stars on it.
You don't see me on Facebook, and I don't buy from Amazon.
Well, good for you.
I don't care.
No, yeah, that's good. No, that's fine. They get their child, used to be son, not son anymore, their children get automatic appointments to any service academy. Automatic appointments to West Point, Annapolis Air Force Academy. Automatic. Can't be turned down. How much is that worth, do you suppose? And free. They get to go tuition free, okay? To a free 4-year education, and let's say you're an 18-year-old grunt in Afghanistan, in the sands of Afghanistan, and you throw yourself on a grenade and you don't die. You manage to survive, all right? And for that you get a Congressional Medal of Honor. You're 18 years old, and finally you get to be 25 or 26. You get married. You have a couple of kids. You weren't probably maybe even thinking about that when you were 18, throwing yourself on a grenade, okay? But that's what you get. Now, I don't know that William was thinking of his great-great-great-great-great-grandchildren, but he might have been. And Churchill and Wellington and all these other people. I mean, I can give you example after example after example after example, okay? And a lot of these guys, let's take a good example that you know, okay? And I'm sorry for dragging this out, but I think it's a really important point. Let's take a good example that you know. Arthur, the guy's name was Arthur, okay? He was a poor kid from Wisconsin. And during the war between the states, he was a young kid, 17, 18 years old. He joined the Wisconsin, I think it was 31st Infantry or something like that. Anyway, he joined the Wisconsin Infantry, went to basic training, all this kind of stuff. And during the Battle of Missionary Ridge, which is in Tennessee, and it was a very important battle. I mean, this was going to tell the tale about who was going to control the Chattanooga Railroad and who's going to control that valley, the very important valley that later became Tennessee Valley Authority. Okay, and it was very, very essential that the Union win this battle. Well, they weren't doing so hot. The Confederates were all on top of a hill. They had the high ground. And with that high ground, they were bombarding people and shooting snipers and everything, and they were just really having a hard time. And so this Battle of Missionary Ridge, the Wisconsin battalion or regiment, whatever, was ordered, take that hill. And Arthur was just a shaved tail. I think he was a corporal, or maybe even a private, but I think he was a corporal. And he went with his guys. He wasn't a sergeant, he wasn't an officer, he was nothing. Okay, he was just a common guy, right? And so he charges up the hill, and in front of him there's a guy with the flag, right? And it's very important. The flag guy, more important in those days than today. But that flag guy, because you got to know where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, you're going to get, your attack is not going to be focused, right? And so the guy with the flag, in this case was American flag, and the guy with the flag is the guy you kind of key on. And so, of course, the guys on the other side, the Confederates, they're pot-shotting at this guy, and they shoot him and kill him. Okay? And the flag goes down. And Arthur just happens to be the guy who's closest, and he grabs the flag and he holds it way up like this, making himself a good target, okay? And he yells, guess what he yells? On Wisconsin. I'm not kidding. Actual, real story. He yells, on Wisconsin, and they take the ridge. His officers mark it down. Yeah, boy, we would have been lost without Arthur. Without Arthur, we'd have been maybe the whole war gone down for us, And so he gets the Medal of Honor. And his son gets to go to West Point. Okay? And his son's name is Douglas. And he is the son of Arthur MacArthur. And, the MacArthur family is, of course, very wealthy today. There's the MacArthur Foundation. Douglas, he lived in the Waldorf Astoria overlooking Central Park. Had a huge penthouse suite at the top. When he was in the Philippines, he made millions. As a titular governor of the Philippines. His father, Arthur, was governor of the Philippines when it was a colony of the United States. How many of you remember that the Philippines were actually a colony of the United States? Yeah. Okay. So here's a guy. Here's a common everyday yokel like you and me. I don't know if he was a shoemaker or a cabinet maker, but he was just a regular guy. Okay. And in that one moment, grabs that flag. And he's not the one who got the mini ball in the chest. Okay? Grabs the flag, he waves it, he doesn't get shot. I mean, there's all kinds of holes in the flag, but he doesn't get shot. He says the famous saying that's now the band song for the University of Wisconsin football team. And from that one thing, his family never has to worry about a dime again for the rest of their existence. And what do we do? Do we boo them? No. To this day, Douglas MacArthur still has the record of getting the most ticker tape of anybody, including the Apollo astronauts, in a New York ticker tape parade. Okay? So let's not be so hasty when we see poor old Queen Elizabeth, 90-something years old. What is she, 97, 98, whatever, 95, Okay? Let's not, come on. What do you hate on the royals, okay? Because all the royals, I don't care what royal family you're talking about. I think the royal family of Spain, the royal family of Belgium, the royal family, I don't care what royal family you're talking about. You go all the way back to the very beginning of that royal family and you find a guy like Arthur MacArthur. Yeah. Okay. So, long answer to your question. But that's how people get to be lords and dukes and earls and all that kind of stuff. It's God.
Yeah.
Okay? Same reason George Washington became famous and had half a dozen bullet holes in his coat, but never got hit. God.
So did Douglas MacArthur.
Same reason we don't have two countries on this continent. Okay? Because what was his name? Burnside. General Burnside liked cigars. And so he asked one of his guys, go into town and get me some cigars. And the guy went into town, and as he's going across the creek called Antietam Creek, he finds a note all bundled up, and it's the plans, Robert E. Lee's plans for the invasion of Maryland. And so because Burnside likes cigars, we have one nation instead of two. Okay? If you don't learn anything else from history, folks, and one thing I have learned from history is that it's all made up of tons and tons and tons and tons of divine coincidences. You can see God's handprint real clear. One guy falls, the other guy doesn't. One guy gets shot, another guy doesn't. One guy, it's throughout history. All right, let's keep going here. Anyway, so Frederick the Wise, Miltitz, wasn't that a wonderful name, Miltitz? Miltitz used this opportunity to meet with Luther on January 4th through 6th. At this point, Luther agreed he would remain silent. Please note that. Luther said, okay, I won't say anything else, all right? If the other side remains silent. He also agreed he would write a conciliatory letter to the Pope and would publicly urge people to remain loyal to the Roman Church. He says, okay, I'll say I'm sorry to the Pope. I misspoke. I said unkind things. I wasn't a gentleman. Right? I'll do that. But that's a lot, especially for a crusty old German guy. He's not so. And Germans didn't like to give in to the Italians. The quiet quickly gave way to an additional debate. Leading the opposition to Luther was Dr. Eck of Ingolstadt. Dr. Eck becomes Luther's antagonist, right? Who invited Luther's colleague, Andreas von Kallstadt, to debate the issues at Leipzig during the summer of 1519. Eck knew that Kallstadt was an idiot. Okay? Now, Kallstadt was a smart guy. He was, he got his master's degree and his doctor's degree and all that kind of stuff. But he was one of those people, that eked by the skin of his teeth or was a good brown noser or whatever. And he just didn't have the talent that Luther had, not even close. And so Eck is picking who he wants to debate. He doesn't want to debate Luther, but he wants to debate Kallstadt because he knows he can beat Kallstadt. He doesn't want to debate Luther because he knows he'll lose. All right? It was here that Luther and Eck debated face to face. And I didn't put it in here, but basically when Luther finds this out, he tells Kallstadt, stand down. I'll take your place because you can't handle this guy. This guy is too good for you. Okay? So Luther and Eck wind up debating face to face. Instead of debating the indulgence problem, for which Luther was fully prepared, Eck brought up completely new issues. Again, first he tries to debate the dummy instead of Luther, and then when he finally gets Luther, he knows Luther's loaded for bear on indulgences, boy. He knows. Luther's ready to just paste this guy. And so he didn't bring it up. He starts talking about everything else. Okay? Luther hadn't given these items much thought. Eck hoped to draw Luther's heretical comments on the authority of the Pope and Council. See, this is what the real thing was. It's not that Luther was dumb. It's just that Luther, he wanted to take things a step at a time, piece at a time. Let's deal with the indulgences first. Then we can deal with whether or not the councils are authoritative or whether or not the Pope's infallible. Okay? I don't want to get dragged into that right now. I would rather deal with and Eck, he's wise enough, he's clever enough to say, I'll get beat on the indulgence thing. But if I bring up the Pope and the church councils and Luther comes out against those, even Luther's supporters will go, oh man, this guy is off his rocker. Okay? Okay? For the first time at Leipzig, Luther was exposed to the public charge of heresy. Also, up to now, it's been kept from the folks, the average people. All they know is there's trouble going on. They don't really know who's a heretic or who's being called a heretic or not. Okay? It was here that he began to see the full implications of his theology and realized that his views were not the views of the majority of church, neither clergy nor laity. He seemed totally alone. And so at this point, Luther now begins to dawn on him. I can't stick this only to indulgences. I can't just talk about purgatory. I can't just talk about the 7 sacraments. I'm going to have to deal with the systemic problem in Romanism, which is the Pope. I have to deal with that. I can't help it. And as soon as he realized that, he knew nobody's going to follow me on this because they're all afraid of the Pope, which they had every right to be, because remember, this is the Pope who had the last few reformers. Okay? The great publicity generated at Leipzig brought the Lutheran controversy to the center of the religious stage in Europe. So everybody heard about this, and it was printed up, so portions of it was printed up and sent out all over the place. Unfortunately, it also made Luther the focus of smoldering discontent in Germany. So there were political people in Germany who used Luther to get back at the Pope. Once again, God was using world events to move toward a fuller and much-needed reformation of his church on earth. By the beginning of 1520, Luther's views had crystallized and led to a flurry of publishing activity. In addition to lesser works, he completed 5 major writing projects. His treatise on good works demonstrated how faith in Christ was, so to speak, the only good work. Moreover, this work was something that could be performed only by grace of God, because of faith itself is a gift of God. So once Luther realized that it wasn't just about indulgences, it wasn't just about purgatory, it was about so much more, then he started producing a lot of material. This guy was a writing machine. He turned out books like crazy. He followed this with the papacy of Rome. Here Luther pointed out that the Pope was actually the very Antichrist. So he doesn't just come out and say we need to get rid of the Pope, or he doesn't just come out and say the Pope is a bad guy. He comes out and he says this guy is the Antichrist. This guy is actually against God. Imagine doing that in 1520. You can't even get away with that today. Because he kept people from understanding and listening to the message of the gospel, even though the Pope claimed to be Christ's vicar on earth. He closed the year with 3 of what would become his best-known works: the Address to the Christian Nobility of the German Nation, which I think every American should read, because this is what we should hold our political rulers to. Appeal to the German princes to cut the ties that bound them to Rome. This meant the nobility had to take the lead in economic and political issues as well as spiritual concerns. Then Luther's Babylonian captivity of the church examined the sacramental system of the Catholic Church. He argued that only baptism and the Lord's Supper, along with penance, that is, private confession absolution, were sacraments as authorized by Christ in the New Testament. In contrast, of course, as we know, the Roman Church had developed a system of 7 sacraments and turned all of them into works of self-righteousness. Finally, in The Freedom of a Christian, Luther explained how a believer, redeemed entirely by God's grace, would be naturally active in doing good works. He wrote, quote, "A Christian is a perfectly free Lord of all, subject to none. A Christian is a perfectly dutiful servant of all, subject to all." And it was this line, and it was this book, that really gave birth to what we know later on as the Enlightenment, and people like John Locke, and Hume, and what's his name? Even Thomas Paine, who was an atheist. And really, this line is the foundational principle of the American Revolution. This was quoted many times by founding fathers. I don't know if they all realized it came from Luther, because it was quoted by many other people too. But it was a the principal idea is that we are free and subject to nobody. And yet at the same time, we are subject to everybody. That is, we must treat everybody as we want to be treated. So it's a tension, yes, but it's a very good tension. The formative years were over now, and the struggle was on. The stakes reached new heights with Exsurge Domini, a papal bull excommunicating Luther, was issued on June 15, 1520. It condemned him for holding doctrines that were contrary to the Bible as interpreted by previous church fathers, councils, and popes. So he was excommunicated from the church that day, and because he disagreed, not with the Bible, but with the popes, councils, and church fathers. Next page, paragraph 26. It also warned people, that is the document, warned people to reject Luther's heresies and burn his writings. Luther responded by burning the bull on December 10th. This was considered an act of war. If you got a papal bull, think of it as a bulletin, as a news flash, whatever, announcement, right? If you got a papal bull, especially if it was directed right at you as an individual, and that happened, not just to Luther, but it happened to kings and princes and other people. But anyway, you had a papal bull, and you took that out in public, in the public square, as he did. I think it was Wittenberg. I can't swear to that. Take it out in the public square, get a nice bonfire going, and then toss it in there. That is an act of war. Okay? That's what it is. That's an act of war. You're basically telling the Pope and the Church, whatever. Fill in your own expletives. That's what you're doing. And wow, nobody survived that up to Luther. Nobody. Every person who had done that beforehand was either brought to heel in one way or another, and most of them executed. The following year, November 3rd, January 3rd, issuing the next excommunication to be in effect. So first you excommunicate him, but you kind of hope, okay, the guy will read this and get scared and come back. So you leave a little wiggle room, you leave a little grace period. But then in the next thing, in January, you then say, okay, that's it. You're out, you're done, and being outside the law of church or society, in other words, an outlaw. That's where the word outlaw comes from, if you ever wanted to know. The word outlaw does not mean you did bad things, necessarily. What it means is you're outside the protection of the law. You cannot be protected by the Fifth Amendment or whatever. In other words, the laws of the realm no longer apply to you. That's what outlaw originally meant. Anyone who recognized him could kill him on the spot and receive the blessing of both church and state. You would get a nice reward. And probably you might become one of these dukes and earls. Could be. Very likely. Or at least you would have the money to be. The break was now complete. Luther had worked to reform the church from within. Now he would have to work his reform from the outside. So it took a long time. It took more than 3 years for the break to actually happen. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't when what didn't happen on Halloween 1517. It took 3 more years before finally there was no going back. And again, I think we need to understand this, and we need to understand that this is how God works. Yes, God sometimes does things very quickly. The fall of Babylon is a good example. Fell overnight, literally, overnight, boom, gone. But many times, most of the time, God takes years, decades, or even centuries to accomplish something that he wants to do. And we have to be patient with it. We have to, we are asking God, okay, give us a better governor, give us a better president, give us a better this, give us a better country, give us a better, and God is saying, well, yeah, okay, be patient. Be patient. It might take a couple 100 years. Come on. All right. Okay, questions, comments. We'll pick it up at the Diet of Worms, if you want to pronounce it correctly. Anything? Okay, let's close. May the grace of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be and abide with us all. Amen.